shot from here. And Trujillo is the third largest city in the country. It's on the northwest corner of Peru, which is on the northwest corner of South America. So you just keep going northwest and you'll get there eventually. We're right on the beach. Where we were living this past year is about 3/4 of a mile from the ocean. So we're pretty close to the Pacific. And this next slide is there not because you need a resume from us or because we want to tell you what great Christians we are, but to encourage you that what we're about to share, that God has asked us to do in Peru, is just an extension of what we were already doing here. And to encourage you that what God has in store for you is an extension of what you are already doing. He is already preparing you for the next step. I spent 5 summers in my college years as the camp director of Bulldog Summer Camp in Chicago, working with mostly inner city kids. And there were times where we had between 40 and 60 first through 6th graders from all different places, all different kinds of backgrounds. It was a multicultural camp right there in the heart of Chicago. I spent 3 years as the interim music pastor for Catamaran Baptist Church in Whitewater, Wisconsin, running all of their music, leading songs, running the choir, putting together the special music schedule, being half of the special music schedule, just as involved as I could get. And I studied music and education at Maranatha Baptist University in Watertown, Wisconsin, with the goal of winding up in full-time ministry. Hannah was born and raised at God's Adventure Camp in north central Pennsylvania. Her parents have run that camp up there in Rowlett for close to 30 years now. Rowlett's not on the map if you look for it. We've had 1 or 2 people who knew where it was because they've gone up there hunting, and that's about it. But she grew up there and did everything from being a gopher when she was really little to bookkeeping as she got older and became an adult. And so she's had plenty of camp experience, which will be invaluable to us in the ministry we're heading into. She interned for Harvest Deaf Ministry for a summer in Georgia, and that summer gave her a heart for people for whom the gospel is difficult. We take for granted things like the ability to hear the gospel, but not only that, the ability to hear it in our language, the ability to read it in our language, having qualified pastors and teachers who can explain Scripture and give us the fuller understanding of it, help us rightly divide the word of truth. Those are all things that we often take for granted. I know I have. And heading off to Peru and realizing that there are plenty of people in the country who maybe don't speak Spanish and don't have a translation of Scripture in their language. There are people who cannot read. The literacy rate is low, so the rate of illiteracy is high. There's a lot of folks who can't read the Bible. And there are just a lot of people with reasons why the gospel is difficult for them to hear and understand. And Hannah in that summer was given a heart for this specific group, those who are unable to hear it. But that heart to get the gospel to those who have difficulties hearing it has extended into her time in Peru. And she studied cross-cultural studies at Maranatha. That's the Maranatha missions degree. They took the name missions off of it after they had a few missionaries try and get into closed countries and get rejected because their education was in Christian evangelical missions work. Cross-cultural studies sounds much more refined and sophisticated, and so they were able to get into those countries later. That's a little bit of our background. In 2019, the church I attend in Martinsville, about an hour north of here, took a trip to visit some missionaries that we've supported for many years in Peru. I was able to go on that trip. We spent a month in the country and did a couple different things. I was able to do some preaching and teaching. I already spoke enough Spanish to be the translator for that team, enough Spanish to get us in trouble and usually get us out, usually. We were able to do some work with kids programs in several different churches across the country. We were also able to visit Peru Baptist Seminary, Seminario Bautista del Peru, and just see the work that's going on there. They are training the next generation of preachers and teachers to serve in the church there in Peru. And as we were there, Pastor David Stillwell, who is the president of the Bible College, was telling us that they had a music program years ago, but many of their professors had either retired or moved on to other things, and they wanted to rebuild their music program. And so they were praying that God would send them someone who could do music in Spanish. And I said, all right, I'll pray that God will send you someone. Didn't think anything of it at the time. Then we went to Campamento Fortaleza, which is Camp Fortress, and got to tour the grounds. They were not in the middle of camp season at the time, so they were empty. But we got to just see where God had done so much. That camp is full every week that it's open. And Pastor Stillwell, who's on the board of leaders, was telling us that it's run by a group of pastors who are all full-time pastors, and many of them do other things. Like him, he is the president of the Bible College as well. And they felt that the camp was not being used to its full potential. They were able to have it open a couple weeks in the summer, but that was about it. But every time the doors were open, people were getting saved, and young people were bringing their friends and getting them to hear the gospel, and God was working. So they were praying for someone with camp experience who could come and do it in Spanish. And I went, okay, I'll pray that God will send you someone. I didn't think anything of it. And then I got home, back to the States, and as I was praying about it, the Lord said, well, why don't you stop praying for someone else to do it and just go do it? Because I had done all of those things. I had taught music. I had a degree. I was working on finishing. That would allow me to teach music, and I already spoke the Spanish and could figure it out. I had spent time in camp ministry, and the girl I was dating at the time had tons of camp experience. And so we began to think very seriously about that. And I came home from this trip and went to my girlfriend of 3 years at the time and said, hey, if the Lord called me across the world to a different culture in a different place, would you go with me? And I thought, this is either going to be the end of us, or this is I'm going to have to propose to her like next week because, you know. And sure enough, she thought for about a minute and a half and said, yeah, sure, why not? And so we didn't look back. We went for it. In 2022, I was able to take my second trip, and this time I took Hannah with me. And we went to a little town called Kiteni, which is about 10 hours out into the jungle in the south of Peru. And there is nothing out there. We went out as far as the road goes. The pavement ends at the end of town, and then it's just dirt paths into the Amazon. And we were able to help build this church, the little brick building you see there on your right, my left. And I have a musician's hands, so I built some calluses that week. It was pretty exciting. And the missionaries that we were with for those 2 weeks, as we were doing music and, again, working with the youth, told us, if you can survive 2 weeks in the jungle, you'll be fine going to a big city like Trujillo. They have Peruvian Walmart. I thought that was a joke. It was not. It's called ProMart, and it's Peruvian Walmart. So we survived that 2 weeks in the jungle, and we were able to see, even in a small jungle village, look at the size of that church. The people are hungry. That represents a huge percentage of the population of that town. They want to hear truth. They want to know what God says. They have questions about what the Bible teaches. And if you come in and say, I'm going to teach truth and teach what God tells us in His Word, they'll listen. Now that's good and that's bad, because sometimes charlatans walk in saying, I'm going to teach you truth, and they teach them whatever. But when there are Bible preaching churches in the area, the people are flocking to them. They're hungry to hear. And God is working. God is honoring that hunger and giving them the answers that they need. We spent February to July of this year in Peru on a survey trip, and our goals were that we would be able to stay the entire time. We were a little worried about some health issues that Hannah and I, specifically myself, some health issues that we have. We thought we might have to come home midway through that trip, but we were able to stay the whole time. We were there to get an idea of what our roles would look like at the seminary and at the camp, and what's the job description? What do we need to be prepping now? Do I need to be building curriculum for the seminary? Do we need to be looking at policy and figuring out how we want to handle counselors and all those kinds of things at the camp? What's already in place that we can build upon? Those kinds of things. And then our final goal was to return to the States in July and begin full-time deputation, to return full-time, which we're doing. We are in the middle of that. So this picture here is from February of this year. We were able to go back to the camp when there were actually people on it, on the campgrounds. And that is 250 18 to 25-year-olds who took a week out of their summer to come and hear the Bible preached. Some of them are from churches in the area. Some of them are Christians. Some of them are pastors' kids. Some of them have never heard the name of Jesus other than used as a swear word. Their friends invited them, said, hey, we're going to go to this camp. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to play a lot of games. You should come with us. Also, they're teaching the Bible and they're preaching. And those young people went, okay, that sounds cool, and came and listened, and we saw a lot of young folks saved that week. And that represents 1 week out of a full summer. Every week is like that. They love their fellowship. They love their communion with each other in the games and other times. We were also able to get, again, plugged into the music program there that week at camp doing some specials. Hannah, having worked camps before, had experience with zipline harnesses. Now, I don't know about you, but I hear the word zipline and I start to get a little nervous. And the folks there are no different. Usually, there are 5 people who've had training, who have done zip lines before, and know how the harnesses work and how the hookups work. And this particular week, they didn't realize it, but 4 of those people were out that particular week. So there was one safety person there, and they thought, this is not going to work. This is going to take us forever if we do everything correctly, or we're just going to have to hurry, and people, we'll just have to trust the Lord about it. And Hannah kind of said, well, I've done zip lines before. I could help. But we had been in the country about 2 weeks. And while I speak some Spanish, Hannah really didn't. And so they said, well, how are you going to communicate? She said, oh, I'll figure it out. And so between her broken Spanish and the Peruvians' broken English and a lot of charades, no one died. So that was a small victory there at the very beginning. We were going, thank you, Lord. We didn't kill anybody. After that, we went back to the seminary, and that was where we would spend the next several months as they got into their first semester. Their seasons are flipped, and so their semester starts in mid-March and goes to late June. And that was an adjustment for my brain. I kept thinking, we should be getting into summer. Why are they still doing tests and things in like late May? But we had plenty of opportunities there on the campus. I was working with their choir and doing some music classes, and just to kind of get a sense of where the young people are, what they're learning. We had opportunities to get plugged in with the groups there on the campus. A lot of the seminary students are older. They're young men who've gone out, they've been plugged into their church, and they say, I want to lead or take a more active role in the leadership of my church. Maybe the Lord is calling them into pastoring. And so they come back and they bring their families with them, and they're living in married housing there on the campus in apartments. And for the man, his day looks like going to class at 7 o'clock in the morning, going all the way until 1 or 2 in the afternoon, lunch, and then heading straight off to work, where he works till it's dark. He comes home, he does some homework, he goes to bed, and repeat for the entire semester. This often leaves their wives stuck in the apartment all day with the kids. The other ladies on campus are young students who are unmarried. They're in different stages of life. Nobody quite understands the problems they're having, and getting together with the other moms is a hassle because they're all moms and they're all busy. And so they started a married ladies group some years ago when they realized that this was becoming a thing, that these moms were feeling isolated and lonely. And while their husbands were growing spiritually and really getting trained, the moms were beginning to suffer. And so they started the married ladies group. And Hannah was able to get plugged into that and be an encouragement to these ladies. Gave her several opportunities to help in different ways, do little projects for them, do some cleaning, do some babysitting, and really just be a blessing to the people there. It also helped her Spanish grow. They were super patient and very helpful. I don't know if you can see in that picture, but they're holding up some keychains that they made, some crafts that they did. They got together and did some fun stuff together. And while they were doing that, I was sitting in professors' meetings, reading policy and the student handbook in Spanish and learning their grading system and how their online systems work and learning the disciplinary process and all of those things that you need to know as staff at a Bible college. And we would come back from these meetings, and Hannah was excited to tell me everything and show me this keychain that they made and show me the craft that they did, and it was just a great night, and they were so excited. I'm going, yep, sounds really great, babe. Trying not to fall asleep after consuming policy after policy. But it was a good time for both of us, a good time to learn. We were also able to minister to the students in more personal ways in their homes, just getting together, doing music, encouraging them, helping them with Bible concepts. A lot of the things that I take for granted as basic ideas, that many of you would probably take for granted as basic ideas about the Bible that your pastor has preached, that you've heard in Sunday school, many of those things are not basic ideas around the world. And Christians are learning them as new concepts all the time. And so I'd find myself saying something like, well, in the story of David and Goliath, when David says this, and, this is the result, and so on, and they're giving me a blank look, and I'm going, well, you know the story of David and Goliath, right? It's a seminary student. And he says, well, sort of. And that leads to a 45-minute conversation where we explain what happens in 1 Samuel 17. Now, What are the spiritual lessons that we draw from that? And this was what drew me to Peru. The realization that God doesn't need someone special. He doesn't need a super Christian to go and serve. He just needs someone who's willing, who can pass on the things that they have learned from their preachers and leaders here. And the things that you have heard from me among many witnesses, Paul says in 2 Timothy, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also. And that's the verse that we have chosen. And it was in these settings, working with the ladies on crafts at school, working with some of the young men on music to use in their churches on Sundays, that we were able to do some of that one-on-one discipling and passing on what we've learned. We were also able to get plugged in at Iglesia Bautista Victoria, that's Victory Baptist Church. Again, with the music and kids programs, they stuck us where we could be most useful. And let me tell you, those children's programs, you'll learn the Spanish real quick. You got a 4-year-old looking you in the face saying the same thing over and over again until you get it. You'll figure it out. We were able to begin building a youth choir. That's a group of, again, 18 to 25-year-olds. And the generational gap in Peru is much bigger than the gap even here. There are places in the country where grandma and the grandkids don't speak the same language. Grandma grew up speaking Quechua, which is the native language in their area, and never learned Spanish. And then her kids went off to the public schools and learned Spanish, but they speak Quechua at home with grandma. And when those kids grew up and had kids of their own, the young ones only learned Spanish. They learned it at school, and that's what they speak to mom and dad, and so they don't speak Quechua. So they can't talk to grandma unless they go through mom and dad to translate. And that can create quite a mess in your culture, especially in your church if you've got an older pastor who speaks Quechua, and your young people who are trying to understand and trying to learn the Bible don't even speak the same language the service is being run in. And it can cause quite the divide. And in Trujillo, that's less of a problem because we're in a city. It's much more urbanized. But the effect of many things, the effect of the influx of the internet and other situations, has caused a divide between the youth and their parents and their grandparents and their leaders. And so building this youth choir was part of a solution for us. We thought if we can get them involved in the corporate worship in their church, if we can give them something to do that plugs them into their church in a particular way, then we can help them feel unified with their parents and leaders who are only looking for them to do that, for them to be plugged in. And in building this choir, we were able to give them an opportunity to do that. And the change was immediate. The effect of taking ownership of part of the service was a visible victory. And so we are excited to do more of that when we go back. Our particular ministries that we'll be involved in are the camp, Campamento Fortaleza, and the seminary. We'll serve as program directors for the camp, taking some of that load off of the shoulders of local pastors who are already doing too much. And in the seminary, I'll begin building a music program, rebuilding what they once had and getting new things off the ground. The goal of both discipleship of the individual and development of the local church. Lessons that we learned on this trip: we advanced our understanding of the language, we were able to define the ministries that we'll be a part of, and we were able to begin to adjust to the culture and the context. It's a different world, and I did not realize how much before I went. I don't think anybody ever quite does. The culture shock that I was ready for in my head, that I was expecting, was not the thing that got me. I was thinking the language would be the big problem, and it was, but the bacteria, the bacteria was what really got me. It's a different kind of sickness. Let me tell you, I lost 30 pounds, and not in a healthy way. It was not great, but in my weakness, his power is made known, and his grace is more than sufficient for my need. And so we were able to begin adjusting to that, be able to begin finding some answers, some medications that will help, food to avoid, things to do to keep sanitation and keep safe, and that was good for us. It forced us to trust in situations where we might have otherwise been self-sufficient. Our current goals are to finish BMM's candidate seminar. We were in person in July for 2 weeks. We have a few more hour-long classes that we're doing online as we go. Finishing up deputation, rather getting into deputation, we're just getting started. We've been on the road since July in a different church every Sunday we've been in the country, and the Lord is blessing. And then at some point, language school. I do know enough Spanish to get by, but if I'm going to be preaching and teaching on a regular basis, I need a better grip on the language. And Hannah, who went into Peru in February not really knowing the language very much, came out conversational. She's able to hold conversations and build relationships. And we're very thankful to the Lord for that. But she also knows that if she's going to be a help, a big help, she needs a better grip on the language. So language school is on our horizon somewhere. Thank you for partnering with us. Whether that's in prayer, take a prayer card, stick it on your fridge, and every time you grab a snack, toss up a prayer for us. We would appreciate it. Ways you can be praying that the Lord will bring in the funds. We'll be able to get back in the country quickly, that the Lord will keep us healthy on this deputation process, and that the Lord will keep us faithful as we continue moving forward. Or if the Lord leads you to partner with us economically, we would be very grateful for that as well. But however, thank you for partnering with us. I'm going to sing a song this evening before we head into the message. It's titled Such a Crown, and I believe there's some slides for that as well. And it contrasts the crown of life that Christ presents to us with the crown of thorns that he wore in order to give us that crown of life, and the sacrifice that he made for us versus the joy that we have in reigning with him one day in heaven. I hope that song is a blessing to you as it is to me every time I'm able to sing it. If you would take your Bible with me, We are headed to Matthew chapter 25. Matthew chapter 25 tonight. Pastor asked Brother Kurt what time we should be done tonight. He said, you folks usually done around 9. Is that right? Matthew chapter 25. Often, as I'm at a church and telling folks how Hannah and I wound up doing this, they ask me, how did you know you were supposed to do missions? How did you wind up answering the call to missions? And I think usually they're expecting a story along the lines of, I was sitting in a service and I heard someone preaching, I heard a missionary or an evangelist or a pastor preach, and God spoke to me, and I knew right then that I was supposed to be a missionary. And I went to the altar and I prayed, and that's been my plan ever since. And if they're expecting that story, they're often disappointed because I don't have that story. I don't have a clear moment where God struck me with a thunderbolt out of the sky and said, you're supposed to be a missionary. And so, how did we wind up doing this? I would put forth to you that it was a series of small steps of obedience. One thing led to another in God's plan and in God's timing. And we found ourselves on this path going, all right, we're going to trust the Lord and take this step. And in Matthew chapter 25, we find a principle that I would like to draw out from this. We start in verse 14. Jesus has been preaching and teaching for a while here, and he jumps into a parable in verse 14. For the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling into a far country, who called his own servants, and delivered unto them his goods. And unto one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to every man according to his several ability. And straightway took his journey. Then he that had received the 5 talents went and traded with the same, and made them other 5 talents. Likewise, he that had received 2, he also gained other 2. But he that had received 1 went and digged in the earth and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants cometh and reckoneth with them. And so he that had received 5 talents came and brought other 5 talents, saying, The Lord, thou deliverest unto me 5 talents. Behold, I have gained beside them 5 talents more. His Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. He also that had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 2 talents. Behold, I have gained 2 other talents beside them. His Lord said unto him, Well done, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. Then he which had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew thee that thou art a hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not strawed. And I was afraid, and went and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, there thou hast that is thine. His Lord answered and said unto him, Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knewest that I reap where I sowed not, and gather where I have not strawed. Thou oughtest therefore to have put my money to the exchangers, and then at my coming I should receive mine own with usury. Take therefore the talent from him, and give it unto him which hath 10 talents. For unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away, even that which he hath. In this parable, we find 3 men, but really 2 examples: the faithful servant, the faithful servants, and the unfaithful servant. And when I was younger, when I was a kid, I would read this, and first off, I didn't understand what talents were, and so I thought it was talking about the master literally giving talents unto his servants, and so he had a very talented servant, and that wasn't quite right. But the other thing that I thought that I had wrong was that the servant who had 5 talents and made 10 had done the best, that he was the most faithful servant because he wound up with the most talents, or the most money at the end of it. And then the servant who had 2 and got another 2, he did okay, he did his best. And the servant who had 1, well, at the end he was just broke, and so obviously he should be punished for that. And at some point or other, I expressed this to my mother, and she very quickly set me straight. That wasn't quite right. What makes the faithful servant faithful in this passage? It's not the amount that they wind up with at the end, but rather what they did with what they were given. And we see in the response of the master, he says this, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Here it is. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord." He had given them something small, a small amount to do something with. And he expected them to be faithful in what they were given, to obey in the small things. And when they demonstrated that obedience in the small steps, he then gave them something bigger. He made them ruler over many things, and expanded their responsibilities and gave them a bigger mission than what they had previously. And to the servant who was unfaithful, he had a very different response. And for me, in my life, this series of small steps of obedience, being faithful in the small things, is how I wound up with something that is pretty big to me. If you had asked me 5-6 years ago, this is where I'd be now, I would have said, well, almost definitely not. That sounds crazy, but here we are. And another example in Scripture of someone who was faithful in the small things until God gave him something bigger is David in 1 Samuel 17. That's where we'll spend the rest of our time tonight. 1 Samuel chapter 17. As I mentioned earlier, this is the story of David and Goliath. To many of us, this is a familiar story. We know how it starts. The Philistines and the Israelites are gathered on either side of the valley of Elah. They pitch their tents and they're ready to go to war. And then Goliath, this 9-foot warrior with very impressive weapons and armor, I will spend several verses telling us about that, comes out and says, "Hey, we don't have to fight army against army. We'll just fight man to man. So you Israelites send out a man and he'll fight me and I'll fight him. And if I win, you'll be our servants. And if you win, we'll be your servants." And he defies the armies of Israel to send out anybody against him who can take him on. And nobody takes up that challenge. The really ugly part of this is that he not only defies the armies, but he defies the God of Israel. He says, "Your puny God can't do anything about me, and I'll show that to you in man-to-man combat." And nobody in all of Israel does anything about it until young teenage David shows up on the scene. He says, "Whoa, is there not a cause?" And goes and does something about it. Takes a stick and a sling and some rocks and goes out against this warrior and has a great victory. The Lord gives him a great victory. And after that, the trajectory of David's life is changed. He becomes a hero in Israel. Saul has slain his thousands, but David has 10,000s. Right? He was a household name. He becomes a captain in the army of Israel. He goes on and becomes a man of valor. He does great things for Saul. And then he's hunted by Saul and eventually becomes king of Israel. He's one of the most important kings in their history, to the point that the throne of Israel is called the throne of David. And the city of David, he's an important person to them. And all of that stems from this moment. This large moment of obedience in David's life and trusting the Lord to do something bigger than what he could do on his own. And what led him to this moment was a series of small steps of obedience that we see in this chapter. And I'd like to look at a few of those tonight. The first lesson we take from David's life is this. His obedience in the small things put him in the right place for the big things. We look at verses 12 to 15. We see that David stayed behind with the sheep. In verses 12 to 15, it describes it describes the sons of Jesse, and that the oldest 3 went off to battle. In verse 15, it says, "But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep. But David stayed home." And it might be simple to think that since he was one of the younger ones, he stayed behind because he was nervous or because he was scared to go to battle. But we know that that's not true. In verse 20, after Jesse has given David the direction to go see your brothers, take them some food, and come back and tell me if they're alive, see that David rose up early in the morning and left the sheep with the keeper, and took and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the trench as the host was going forth to the fight, and shouted for the battle. David shows up to this as the armies are arraying themselves, getting ready in the morning, and he's excited. He doesn't go and hide. He's not afraid of this fight. He shouts for the battle. He probably was expecting to see the armies of Israel get a great victory that day, that God would give them victory like he had in their history. And he's disappointed when of course Goliath comes out and they don't fight, they don't have that victory. But we see that he didn't stay behind because of cowardice. We also know that he didn't stay behind because being a shepherd was just such a glorious job. There was just so much honor in being a shepherd. In fact, in verse 28, Goliath, his older brother, makes fun of him. He says, "Why camest thou down hither? With whom hast thou left those few sheep of the wilderness? I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thine heart. If thou come down, thou mightest see the battle." Goliath says, "Who did you leave those piddly few sheep with in the wilderness? Don't you have stuff you're supposed to be doing at home? Weren't you supposed to be watching the sheep, you little punk? What are you doing here?" And he makes fun of him. And now some of you who are older brothers might say, "Yeah, what was that little punker man?" But that's a different message. He's made fun of for his role as a shepherd in the family. So we know that he didn't stay home because of the glorious position that he was offered. He stayed home out of obedience. That's what his father had asked him to do. That was the job that he was given. That was the responsibility that he had. And when we see his responsibilities change, when Jesse tells him in verse 17, "Take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren." When Jesse gives him that instruction, David once again obeys quickly. He takes the stuff, he rises early the next morning, and he makes for the camp. He gets there, and he goes and finds his brother, he gives him the food. And he does all of that as he's asking, "So what's up with this giant? What's up with this challenge? Anybody going to do anything about it?" Even as he's asking those questions, he goes to find his brothers and obey the instruction that his dad gave him. And those moments of obedience put him in the right place to hear Goliath's challenge and to be in a position to do something about it. Often, for us, it could be difficult sometimes to see the reason for why we are where we are, or to understand the reasoning behind why we've been given something to do. In my life, there have been situations that confused me at the time, but of course, looking back, we see the hand of God at work. One such situation was in 2018. I was in college, and I broke my arm. I managed to bend my elbow backwards. If you want more details about that, you can ask me later. I had to have reconstructive surgery. I now have a bionic elbow. I've got pins and screws and plates and all sorts of fun stuff. And getting through airport security sometimes is a hassle. But all of that led to me not having the money I needed to pay for my next semester. And I really didn't want to sit a semester out. I had some momentum. I thought if I stop now, I don't know if I'll come back. I don't know if I have the motivation, and I'm close to being done, and I would just like to kind of finish this up. And my spiritual leaders at the time told me that's really not a wise idea. You're out of money. You're going to be working double the jobs, and your grades are going to suffer. Also, you're still healing. You should probably stay home. I didn't want to do that, but I listened to what they had to say. These were men and ladies who were a lot wiser and smarter than I was. And so in spring of 2019, I stayed home for that semester. And that was the semester that my church put together that first trip to Peru. If I had gone back to school, I'd have missed it. I wouldn't have been there. And I don't know what I'd be doing now, because it was that trip that the Lord used to put me in contact with the missionaries I'm working with now. If I had done what I wanted to do, I wouldn't have been where I was supposed to be for what God had for me. And that small step of obedience and staying home for that semester was what put me in the right place. I'm going to tell a few other stories, but none of these, I want to be clear, none of these are to just say what a great Christian I am and I've been so obedient to my life, but to tell you that God's plan is so much better than the plans that we have for ourselves. And if we will submit to his leadership through his word, through the spiritual leaders that he gives us, he'll take us places we could never get on our own. I don't know what that situation is for you, what that place is for you now that doesn't make sense to you. But I can tell you that if you're faithful where you are, you'll be in the right place when God has something else for you. For Hannah and I in Peru, sometimes the place we were supposed to be was in a taxi, to give a tract to that taxi driver, or to have him ask, "Hey, you're American, what are you doing here? Are you tourists?" For us to say, "No, we're here spreading the gospel." And he goes, "What's the gospel?" And I'm going, great, my missions field is right here in this taxi right now. And that was the moment. Sometimes it was in line at the supermarket. And for them to say, hey, you're American, what are you doing here? We don't usually have tourists come and get groceries. And for us to say, we're here to serve the Lord and spread the gospel. What's the gospel? And the same situation would play out time and again in the little things that we were doing every day. For some of you, that's probably very similar. In your workplace, you may be the only light that your coworkers ever see. So those of you who are raising children, your place is in the home now to raise up those kids in the nurturing admonition of the Lord. Those of you who are grandparents, you have a responsibility to be in your place as a light to your family. You have, and I'm speaking to the Sunday night crowd, so I'm aware that these are the faithful. You're here on a Sunday night and your place is in church to be a part of your service, to be a part of your church family, to be plugged in and serving and encouraging your brothers in Christ. Whatever that place is, be faithful in it. And as the next step comes along, you'll be in the right spot as God leads you. Second lesson we take from David's life is this. His obedience in the small things prepped his skills and abilities for the big things. In verses 34 to 40, we see David telling Saul the story of his fight with a lion and a bear. The servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, took a lamb out of the flock, and I went out after him and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and smote him, and I slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. David went into these fights with the same tools that he had when he went to fight Goliath. His staff, his sling, and some rocks. And he came out of improbable fights with apex predators as a victor. And I don't know about you, but I never imagined that I could take on a lion and a bear with some rocks and a stick. That's just not really something I ever had the hubris to think I could do. But David apparently did it twice. And when he came up to his fight with Goliath, Saul tries to arm him. Now, Saul's the king. His armor and weapons are probably some of the best in the country. But we see in verse 38, Saul armed David with his armor, and he put a helmet of brass on his head. Also, he armed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go. He stopped. He couldn't go out, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off him. In verse 40, he takes his staff in his hand, and chose 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag, even in a scrip. And his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. When the moment came for David to step up against Goliath, he was offered new tools, new armor, new weapons that were arguably much better than the ones that he had. But he couldn't train with them. He didn't have time to get ready with them, and so he went back to what he knew, the things that he had learned in his small steps of obedience as a shepherd. And when you and I face situations that are bigger than what we're ready for, we won't suddenly develop new skills and abilities. We will fall back on the habits that we have formed in our small steps of obedience. And whatever that looks like now, the habits you're forming, the skills you're building, the abilities that you're growing, those will be the things that you use later in your moment when you're facing your biggest obstacle. For me, it was time spent at Bulldog Summer Camp in Chicago. 2013, I was 15. The pastor of the church was my former music pastor in Martinsville. He invited me up there for the summer. I was nervous. I'd never lived away from home. But he said, come be my intern for 3 months. And I went, I don't know about this. And my spiritual leader said, you should go do it. So I went, okay. And I did. And when I got to Peru and they needed a camp director, it was those experiences that I would fall back on. I didn't know exactly why God had me there at the time, but later I saw, oh, I needed this. I needed to learn these things to use them in Peru. I don't know the habits that you're forming now. I don't know the things that you're doing that God will use later. But your obedience in the small things makes a difference. Your daily time in the Word is what preps your ability to recall those verses to mind when you need them for witnessing or fighting off temptation. Your daily time in prayer is what preps you to intercede for your brethren and to call out to the Lord for help when you need it. The time that you spend in your church is what builds that unity and that community to reach out into the community, into your area. And I will say to the young ones something that I wish I had known long ago. The habits of obedience that you form now with your parents will be the habits that you have with God later. If you resist obeying your parents now, you will resist God later. It doesn't just suddenly switch around. And I'm kind of hard-headed. It took me a while to figure that out. So get it now. Figure out how to obey and to submit to the leadership that you have so that when God knocks on your door later and gives you something bigger to do, you'll be ready. The last thing that we draw from the life of David is this. His obedience in the small things grew his faith. And this is arguably the most important part of the whole situation. In those same stories where he tells Saul, I fought this lion and this bear, and the Lord gave me victory, he also says this in verse 37. David said, moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. Saul said unto David, go, and the Lord be with thee. We go down to verse 45. David goes out to meet Goliath, and Goliath says, oh, what am I, a dog? Did you come to me with sticks? What are you doing, kid? Come on. And David's response is this, thou comest to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand. And I will smite thee and take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with spear, or with sword and with spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. David keeps making very certain statements. He's stating these things as if they are truth. Not the Lord might deliver you, the Lord can deliver you, I hope that the Lord will deliver you, but God will deliver you into my hand. God will give me victory today. And the reason he's able to claim that is because he has seen God do it already in his past. As he obeyed in his time as a shepherd, as he took those small steps of obedience, he was put in situations beyond his control, things that were much bigger than him. And God, time and again, gave him victory and grew David's faith, so that when he faced his greatest challenge, he had the faith to say, I know my God can do it. I know my God can give me this victory because I've already seen him work. I spent 7 years in college. I'm one of the smart ones. Crammed a 4-year degree in 7 years. And in that time, I watched some of my friends enter college, finish their degree, get married, go out and have kids, and start their ministry. Some of them are assistant pastors and pastors now. I watched them move on with their lives and serve the Lord. I got sick. I wound up with some health issues that were debilitating, some things I'm still fighting off today. My money went quickly. All of the things went wrong. And I found myself discouraged and thinking, I don't really need this degree. I'm studying music. I already know how to do music. I could just go join a church. I'm sure I would be useful. I don't really need the piece of paper, do I? And my spiritual leaders, noticing a common trend here, my spiritual leaders once again counseled me, David, this is no longer about the degree. Now it's about your obedience. God has asked you to do this. Are you going to obey, even when it doesn't make sense to you? And once again, kind of, yes, and went on. And I began to see God turn some of those things around. I learned that his grace was sufficient for me, even in my sickness. I watched him pay my bills. And I say he paid them because I worked hard, but really there were times where I don't actually know where the money came from. People would randomly pay on my account. To this day, I have no idea who it was, or how that money got there, or how my bills wound up paid. I exited school with minimal debt, and all of those things are the glory of God. I came out of school married to a young lady who was willing to go across the world with me. I saw God do what to me were miracles. And so when I exited school, and the Lord said, okay, the time has come now for you to decide, are you actually going to move across the world to a different culture, to different people with a different language, far away from your family and the things that you know? Are you going to do that and obey? I can guarantee you that if I hadn't stayed in college, if I hadn't seen God already work, I'd have said, no way am I doing that. That's crazy. But because I had already seen God give victory, because I had already seen him provide, because I had already seen him work in ways that were bigger than what I could imagine, it was a lot easier to say yes to that and to move forward. And again, church, I don't know what it is that you're facing, maybe as a church family, maybe individually. but I can tell you that God is faithful. And as you see him work in the small things in your life, remember those moments when the big things come along. Those of you who are more seasoned saints, I avoid the word old or older. Those of you who are more mature saints, you have stories, I know you do, of ways that God has worked in your life, ways that you have seen him work, ways that you have seen God be faithful. Share those. Those of us who are learning and coming up need to hear that. We need to know of the faithfulness of our God and the things that he can do for us if we will but trust and obey. David listened to his leaders, particularly his father. He was obedient. His obedience put him in the right place. It prepared the skills and abilities that he would need, and it grew his faith so that when he faced his largest obstacle, it was turned into one of the biggest opportunities of his life. He's our example of a servant, like the servants we hear about in Matthew 25, to whom is said, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I will make you rule over many things." And if we want to be that same good and faithful servant, we need to only obey in the small things. Pastor.
David Bennett, for the call of God on the life. Go forth to do. We know that deputation is not an easy thing. We just pray that you strengthen them. You supply the needs they have as they do their deputation, get ready for language school, and be on the field very soon. Thank you again for the opportunity to have us study your word together and pray for Jesus' name. Amen. Tonight we're going to sing Keep Walking with the Lord. And this scripture you have, please come and stand together and sing Keep Walking with the Lord.
Jesus wants to keep us in his care. Everywhere we go, he's always there. He can give us joy beyond compare. Walking in the goodness of the Lord. Keep walking with the Lord all the way. Trusting in his word every day. Keep looking for the sun. Watch and pray, keep walking, trusting all the way, looking, watching, praying every day. If we follow Jesus, he will lead, he will then supply our every need. Absolute success is guaranteed, walking in the goodness of the Lord. Keep walking with the Lord all the way. Keep trusting in his word every day. Keep looking for the sun. Watch and pray. Keep walking, trusting all the way. Looking, watching, praying every day. Jesus is our Savior, God and King. We can look to him for everything. After all he's done, let's shout and sing. Walking in the goodness of the Lord. Keep walking with the Lord.